Last week's Battletech post had us exploring combined arms, looking at infantry and tanks, and how, on paper, in the tech manuals, vehicles, tanks, hovers, they're fantastic battle value buy-in. You get so many more guns and initiative points for a vehicle compared to a mech. But mechs are kings, and we explore this idea with motive hits and different ways of experiencing critical damage that vehicles can get taken out pretty quick by mechs, and also how terrain affects them. So within that framework, there was some excellent feedback in the comments where I had made mention of, again, lots of different ways to explore Battletech, and this idea that in most games that I play, right, every Battletech group kind of has its own player personality. We fight to the death. It's for bragging rights. We go head to head, and that's not to say we don't explore missions or campaigns and different narrative ways of playing, but is that the most realistic representation of the Battletech universe? Machine, resources, C-bills, tonnage. There's this idea, inner sphere pre-clans where the mech warriors are knights of the realm. Being dispossessed is a big deal, so there's often this in-game courtesy that might be extended, although not all the time, right? In the books and in the narrative, there's examples where this goes completely out the window, but this idea of force withdrawal, this idea that you take a certain amount of damage, your mech is crippled, you'll be allowed to withdraw out of combat. We also see this with vehicles, the abandonment rules, where if a vehicle is immobilized, this idea, now it's just literally sitting there, no hull down. If it's immobilized, often the crew will bail out because they realize against mechs and the dangers of the battlefield, it's just better to abandon it. Those rules are kind of baked in, but not necessarily always played. Because again, circling back with my group, we fight to the death. So those times where a tank gets hit early on and gets immobilized, technically it's still in the game. It's still an initiative sink. It could still fight if it's got a turret, even as the battle changes and moves it on. But is that the biggest representation of the game itself as it was intended to play? Now, we've got that framework. There are some times if you're playing with these rules, it's going to be a little bit of a sad face. An example from a recent game, city fight, city tech, city defense. I had to defend the starport, power generation, and the hospital. There's no way I was going to be able to cover all three points. So the idea was to have my forces equally divided, more or less, and then pull back from one to reinforce the others, kind of a delayed action, and concede one to my opponent, and then hold those two for the victory. I had a ring of infantry set up hidden in the buildings. They had a lot more battle value than me because it was an attacker versus defender, and they're moving in with some heavy armor. We've got a von Luckner moving in, very powerful, potent, heavy tank. And this was on just a massive wargaming table. This was going to be an all-day, amazing game. We had like 20K inner sphere battle value. That's clans. 20K is like, here's your 5 mechs. But inner sphere with combined arms, that's huge. So this von Luckner and some other vehicles are moving in. And I had a couple of infantry stands on the ring on the outskirts of the city. They ambushed the tank. I got lucky. I got lucky. I'll take it. Look, we're going to take it. We could debate would I have been better off having that luck later on in the game, possibly. But on that attacking infantry, as a full stand laser infantry, I immobilized the tank. Just blew apart its motive. Critical hit. Fantastic. That von Luckner's on the outskirts of the table for the entire game. Now, in those rules, it would be abandoned. You'd lose it. But tactically, even though the battle is not even going to reflect that, it didn't fire a shot for the entire game, it was an initiative sink. It was still up. Maybe it's participating in the battle or doing something, guarding a flank, who knows. So within that, it was still in the game. I think within this framework, it's important to understand, maybe before the game where you're building your list and you're dealing with different things, how to be aware with your opponent, your Battletech friend, hey, are we playing with force withdrawal? Are we playing with abandoning vehicles, right? How are we going to handle initiative? For a lot of groups, this kind of becomes like a house rule, but I think that's always really important. Now we've got that framework. This leads to a little bit of mailbag here with Battletech. What about leadership tests and morale tests in Battletech? We see in some other wargaming systems where there's this idea if you start taking losses, stuff happens. You can't always issue the commands. And I think this is the difference between skirmish-based games. I'm going to sidebar here for a moment. We need this framework. Skirmish-based games versus larger-scale war games to mass-scale war games. Skirmish-based war games where we're playing something like X-Wing miniatures or Battletech Lance versus Lance. I will visualize myself where I think it's intended for the player on that side to physically be in one of those mechs or in one of those ships, or if I'm playing God Tier, one of the war bands that I'm leading, that's your avatar on the table. It's almost kind of like an RPG type thing where you're there. But as you build out and command more and the games get bigger, now you kind of shift from mech warrior to mech commander. You're back there in the mobile HQ, kicking it back, getting those reports, or maybe you're the backline Cyclops with the battle computer getting those reports. It's a bigger type game. There's this idea, I think, in many modern war games where you want to be able to control everything. We see this in the board gaming community where dice-based games, and I love dice-based games for their just random chaos, but more and more games you'll see are card-based, where I can manage my hand, I can control my resources, and I can mitigate or eliminate any randomness. Gloomhaven is a great example of this, and I love Gloomy. More and more Wargamer players, it's like, well, look, I paid the points for that machine. It should perform exactly how I want, obviously for damage and other narrative points like that. So to impose a morale or leadership system, I don't know how popular that would be. Now I want to sidebar to the sidebar, chain of command. This is a historical World War II rule set. I've pushed up some chain of command rules and tactics and videos to the channel here under that playlist. Chain of command is interesting because it assumes literally the chain of command. You are issuing orders to your units. And what's interesting is how units take damage. I've got 10 infantrymen in that grouping, led by a senior commander. They can issue 2 orders a turn. Move. Senior commander's 3, junior's 2. I can move, I can shoot, I can double run, I can overwatch. As you take hits, 2 things happen. You can lose miniatures, which we're all familiar with, kills, or you take shock. And shock gets recorded somewhere else or gets marked with some tokens. Shock represents, in that moment of the firefight, everything's kind of crazy, chaos, orders are being issued. You move less, you shoot less, and eventually if you take so much shock, you're pinned. You can't do anything. If you take more shock, you break and you run. Now, of course, there's ways to clear shock, but then you can't do other things, so you've got kind of those issues and orders. It's kind of like another layer of the game. It's done very, very well. But what you see is, as the game goes on, 2 things happen. You take physical losses and lose material, but the units that are still there get torn down, torrented down, beaten down, and you have to kind of manage literally the chain of command. Implementing something like that in Battletech where maybe something moves less or it can't split fire, that would be house type rules or things to navigate there. But I don't think it would be very popular in Battletech, not based on the age of the game from its genesis in the 80s, but just kind of the modern expectation of most war games, skirmish from small to medium, is that I'm in full command. So if I tell that battle master, whether I'm piloting it myself or I'm representing it in the Cyclops or in the mobile HQ, and I'm saying, look, go up there, you need to hold those hexes. Yes, there's a hunchback coming. Yes, there's an archer coming. Yes, there's a marauder coming. I need you there 4 turns. I need you to hold that position. There's that understanding. Likewise with vehicles. So the morale, the leadership, I think part of that's represented in the simplification of force withdrawal or abandoning vehicles. Sometimes we play it, sometimes we don't, but I think there's that expectation of know ahead of time before we start turn one, what are we playing with? And then to layer on any house rules or real leadership or morale. It's interesting. It's an interesting idea, but I don't know how well it would be implemented itself in the game.